Good evening, folks, and welcome to another milestone in the Limerick Writers Centre. And today's launch is A Job of Journeywork. It's a selection of writings by Jim Kemmy, TD, edited by Dominic Taylor and Dr. Derek Mulcahy. A Job of Journeywork delves into the life and legacy of Jim Kemmy, TD, a remarkable figure whose words have resonated through recent Irish history. The book spans Kemmy's writings, ranging from the 1960s to his passing in 1997, conveniently divided into the various decades. Throughout the pages of this anthology, readers will trace Kemmy's transformative journey from a local activist to a nationally recognised and respected political figure. To start proceedings, please welcome co-editor Dominic Taylor, director of the Limerick Writers Centre.
Thanks a million, Tom. Very good. I'm just tough on the road got in it. Ladies and gentlemen, and fellow supporters, colleagues, and friends of the late Jim Kemmy, TD. Today, we gather to celebrate a special moment, I believe, in the literary, artistic, and political life of Limerick. It is with great honour and respect that I stand before you to announce the publication of a book that pays homage to the late Jim Kemmy, TD, through a collection of his selected writings, letters, and speeches. Aptly titled A Job of Journeywork, a title coined by Jim himself to introduce a column in a local newspaper in the 1980s. And may I suggest, as well as being the title of the book, it also represents his commitment to a life of service to his fellow man. We may ask ourselves, what happened to that spirit that shone so brightly in Jim over the past decades since his passing? It would appear in many ways that it has been eclipsed by the corporate gods and the financial elites. We at the Limerick Writers Centre believe, like Jim, that other value systems exist, like care, friendship, community, and knowledge. So today, we have a happy reminder of that spirit that Jim engendered by making his words available and accessible once again. It is our hope that if we can place this book in the hands of the young, thinking, and interested reader, Jim's words will reach those who will learn and be influenced by his approach to social justice, inclusiveness, and equality. This is one of the reasons the Limerick Writers Centre published this anthology. As my co-editor, Dr. Derek Mulcahy, states, Jim's text and voice expressed the concern and care for his fellow citizens. All his literary work was a labour of love that opened up the treasures of Limerick to all. I think that encapsulates the life work of Jim Kemmy, and may I say, it also inspires the work of the Limerick Writers Centre. Jim Kemmy was a man of unwavering conviction and boundless optimism. As we do at the Limerick Writers Centre, he believed in the power of words to transform society, to inspire change, and to make the world a better place. The Limerick Writers Centre was formed in 2008 as a non-profit organisation dedicated to nurturing and supporting writers residing in or hailing from Limerick. We foster literary growth through dynamic readings, engaging workshops, and impactful publishing initiatives. Our passion lies in cultivating a thriving literary community where every person, regardless of formal training, finds encouraging support to transform their ideas into the written word. And today, I'm proud to say that this book, A Job of Journeywork, is the 160th title we have published since we began our community publishing program in 2009. To finish, I'd like to thank my co-editor, Dr. Derek Mulcahy, Professor Endeavour for his inspiring foreword to the book, and who will shortly officially launch it. Also to William O'Neill and staff of the People's Museum for hosting us, and all our volunteers at the Limerick Writers Centre. To the readers, I hope that you find inspiration and wisdom within these pages. So let us celebrate the launch of this special book, a tribute to a man who left an indelible mark on Limerick and on the pages of history.
Thank you very much, Dominic. Derek Mulcahy is a historian and author. He currently works in the Academic Support Centre in Mary Immaculate College, Limerick. He holds a PhD in history and a BA in history and English from Mary Immaculate College. He is the current bandmaster of St Mary's Band, Fife and Drum Band. His publishing credits include the leader of the band, Limerick Writers Centre 2021, and By the Left's Quick March, Limerick's Marching Band Division. And anyway, that's it. That's his credentials. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Derek Mulcahy.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen and guests, when Dominic asked me to co-edit this book on the writings of Jim Kemmy, I was more than delighted to do so. Great credit was both to Dominic and all at the Limerick Writers Centre, and also to Professor Endeavour for his involvement and his foreword. I think everyone remembers their first meeting with Jim Kemmy. I first met Jim in the 1980s when I was an apprentice brick and stonemason, working on a new stone wall which bordered St Mary's Cathedral. He called to us one day, and along with other apprentices, we were immediately enamoured by this larger-than-life character that took an interest in what we were doing, and also spoke to us as an equal, explaining about the trade we had, the historical place we worked in, and of course not to forget our bricklayers union. After that I met him at many musical events and other functions over the years. His writings and those of other local historians got me at a young age thinking of the environment that I lived in. I want to get the feeling of the passion that Jim had for his native place and the local characters in his writings. This book is only a taste of Jim's journey of work. I've done a lot of research on Limerick local bands, and Jim stated on the Butterby Band. The people that played with the Butterby Band of the time in the 1850s, 60s and 70s, they were mainly tradesmen. You could find a lot of stonecutters, carpenters, fitters, street sweepers and general labourers. There were many working class people, and they came from the areas of Limerick that would be described as the side streets, the lanes and the slums of the city. But whatever about these conditions, they went on to produce marvellous music. From researching for this book, Jim's marvellous music came from the place he lived in, and most important, the people who lived there. He cared about Limerick and its people, and hopefully this book will remind readers of the legacy he left behind. I'll leave you with a verse from Longfellow that Jim used in his homage to James Connolly. So when a great man dies, for years beyond our ken, the light he leaves behind him lies upon the paths of men. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mulcahy. Now, to launch the book, A Job of Journeywork, Professor Owen Devereux.
Good afternoon, everybody. You're very welcome to the People's Museum here in Limerick, and I'm particularly pleased to see Jan O'Sullivan, Jim's comrade, and Margaret O'Donoghue, who minded Jim in the office here at the Mechanics Institute for many, many years. And of course, all of you, you're all very, very welcome. It's appropriate that we're in the People's Museum because Jim Kemmy spent his life campaigning for the people in all the senses of the word, and particularly working class people. And it's also appropriate that the book launch is taking place in Perry Square, because like many of you, I first learned about the building of Perry Square, about Edmund Sexton Perry, about the Tontine system, about the fact that the People's Park here near us was a dumping ground. And it was through the pages of the old Limerick Journal that I first learnt about these things. And it was, in a way, through Jim Kemmy's publications as an historian and the kind of historians and histories that he promoted that I and many other people began to look at Limerick in a very different way. It was a lens in which you saw the complexity of history, of the struggles of people's lives. I'm also struck by the fact that we're just footsteps away from the Mechanics Institute. The Mechanics Institute around the corner here was, of course, Jim's base in terms of his work and campaigning as a member of the Democratic Socialist Party, in the Labour Party, and of course it was also Jim's base as a trade unionist and as a member of Trades Council. So I'm particularly honoured to launch this important book today, and I'm particularly mindful of, as where we are and the connections with Jim Kemmy this afternoon. Jim Kemmy, for really everybody in this room, I think Jim Kemmy touched upon all of our lives in many different ways. And I've spoken about this before, that personally, when I was maybe 12, 13, and I was trying to learn about the world, for me, the two big influences on my life at that age were punk rock, thankfully, and Jim Kemmy's socialism, and the socialism at that stage of the Democratic Socialist Party. And he appears a number of times in my creative writing. So in Penny Boy, a poem I wrote about the class structure in Limerick City when I was growing up, there's a line which says, "It was big Jim Kemmy and Johnny Rotten who gave me the key." And Jim, really from a really very early age, stood out. People talk about him being this towering figure, this man who had what appeared to be really radical ideas. And that, married to my interest in music, it was a revelation. In 1974, my maternal grandmother, Bridget Kennedy, so Bridget was my mother's mother also of the historian Seamus O'Canada, my uncle, and Bridget died, and I was 9 years of age then, and I've documented an episode, a real episode in my life as a 9-year-old, and I think honestly, it's probably the first time I heard the name Jim Kemmy. So in Ordnance Survey 1974, I write, 200 yards up the street, just across from the pike, the fair green wall is beginning to crumble. White, hand-painted words boldly proclaim, Kemmy for the council. I first heard of Big Jim at my grandmother's funeral. Under a black mantilla, a pillar of the community asked, "What's that fucking communist doing here?" The solid stonemason stayed at the back of the cathedral, quietly paying his respects. I remember later in life asking my mother about Jim Kemmy, and the one thing she did say to me repeatedly was how kind Jim was to my grandmother. She had one of those old stoves that were common in corporation houses. They've become all the rage now again, of course, with all the trendies, but all the lovies. But the stoves at that time, I suppose when I was growing up, they were almost like a symbol of poverty. And I remember there was a problem with the stove in my nana's house, and Jim went along personally and sorted it out, just as an act of kindness, not in his day job in the corporation. So for all of us, Jim Kemmy was this towering presence in our lives. And I still think of Jim, I think of him very regularly, and there are times when I still expect to see him strolling purposefully down O'Connell Street, or down through his favourite street in Limerick, Gerald Griffin Street, with files and papers and books tucked under his arm in the long raincoat, the fawn raincoat, and files and papers, planning another edition of the Old Limerick Journal, or indeed going to a meeting of the Labour Party, or indeed the trade union movement. So it's in this context that I really welcome A Job of Journeywork. It really brings Jim and his ideas centre stage once more. 2 years ago, or last year at least, I spoke at the Remembering Jim Kemmy event, and I talked at that event about meeting Jim for the last time before he became very ill and was hospitalised and so on. And I talked about how just after the election in June 1997, Jim had been narrowly re-elected, and in his own words, the working class had abandoned him. His vote had significantly dropped. And I met Jim in the remaindered section of Eason's books on O'Connell Street, and there was a book there remaindered on the Irish football manager Jackie Charlton. And Jim was standing there on a very warm June day, and he was holding probably 60 or 70 copies of this book, remainder at £1 a piece, under his chin, from his belly up to his chin. And of course, nothing would do me but ask him, Jim, why are you buying 80 copies of this remaindered book on Jackie Charlton? And his answer was really, really interesting. He said, Oni, and he always called me Oni. He'd always call me Oni, not Owen. And he said, I'll be going to houses, visiting families where there might be a young fella or a young girl who normally doesn't read books. They might be interested in Jackie Charlton and soccer. And if I give them the book and they read it, that might encourage them to read another book. And for me, and I've talked about this a number of times publicly about Jim, that for me, this encapsulated his sort of practical, genuine socialism, which he put into practice every day of his life. It was also, I think, a reflection of his own love of books and writing, again, something that's very evident in this collection. Jim realised, I think, quite early on, and I think particularly when he was an emigrant himself in London, that education and reading had the potential to be a liberating experience for all. So I talk about, in the preface or in the foreword to the book, I talk about hearing about Jim Kemmy for the first time. And again, of course, Jim and my memories of him are very much intertwined with my memories of my late father, Eamon Devereux, who was, like Jim, a trade union secretary. And of course, they're both intertwined in the sense that the last time I ever spoke to my dad in person was at Jim Kemmy's funeral, because my dad died 6 days afterwards. So they're very much in my memory intertwined. I mentioned the Mechanics Institute, and when I was a young fella, I used to be a member of St. Joseph's Scout Troop, or Cub Scout Troop. And when the Cubs were over, I'd come down the street here to the Mechanics Institute to meet my dad to get a lift home. And of course, there was a notional £1 for the doorman in the Mechanics Institute on the night the trade unions met there. And there wasn't a doorman, so I became the honorary doorman, and Jim Kemmy ensured that I got the £1 every Friday that I called. So we have in this book Jim's speeches, his letters, his writings, extracts from his publications, from the really interesting radical magazine, the Limerick Socialist, which highlighted the many injustices which Jim and others witnessed in Limerick and beyond. And of course, the book also traces Jim Kemmy's rise in terms of his political career. As we know, he went on to have a major career politically, not just locally, but nationally. And the collection also, with its carefully selected and edited letters, speeches and articles, manages to capture the essence of Jim Kemmy's thinking. What we see across this fine collection of Jim's writing, we see and are able to trace the influences on his thinking, particularly his formative influences, his reading of socialism and Marxism, his activism as a trade union activist and beginning to become involved in the Labour Party in Limerick in the late 1960s. I mean, we first see Jim Kemmy, writing to the Limerick leader, setting out the stall about things, and at that stage, he still, I think, wants to have a back seat. He wants to be an activist, but he doesn't see himself or perceive himself as being out there, leading the movement and so on. And so the book, includes some of those early letters to the Limerick leader, and indeed speeches that Jim made in Limerick at Labour Party and at trade union events. So we see the influences on Jim Kemmy. We see him emerge as a trade unionist and as a political activist. We see him in and out of the Labour Party. We see the formation of the Democratic Socialist Party. We see Jim being quite pragmatic and coming back into the Labour Party and so on. And of course, we see lots of evidence in this fine collection of his publication work. Publication work, not only his speeches and his letters, but also his writing, his editorial work in the Limerick Socialist, in the Old Limerick Journal, and of course, he went on to publish the Limerick Compendium and the Limerick Anthology. What Jim Kemmy does and did in all of this work is put a working class voice and perspective centre stage. He gave legitimacy to otherwise silent or unheard voices. And I think when we think about Jim, we should not only think about him in terms of, his vote in the Dáil, his heroic vote in the Dáil against taxation on children's shoes, various campaigns he led, but we need to think about him all of the piece in terms of his writing and his activism and his generosity and his involvement to help other people in their lives. All of them overlap and are of a piece. I was particularly struck, Limerick Writers Centre are very lucky in the fact that they have Lotte Bender, who's their designer, who designs really all of their books and their publications. If you look carefully at the cover is based on a series of bricks from the line on Jim's poem on the granary, brick upon brick, stone upon stone. And I think that's interesting as well, because Jim, as a socialist thinker, saw how all the various parts of society connected together and how you might explain inequality by looking at these connections. And equally, we think about Jim in terms of the kind of work he did as a historian, as an editor, as a poet, as a writer, as a politician, as an activist. All of these things come together, and they explain to us Jim Kemmy, the self-educated, working class, radical activist. We need to, in reading this book, we need to see all of these strands in combination, which resulted, as we know, in Jim Kemmy making a major contribution to Limerick and Ireland across society, culture, economics, politics, and most of all, social justice. A Job of Journeywork provides us with ample evidence of the development of Jim Kemmy's thinking across his letters, articles and speeches. And I think it also shows his capacity for change, his capacity not to be overly dogmatic in his thinking. And he in many respects embodies the changes that have occurred within social democracy and socialism over time. So his speeches are particularly interesting. There's very little waffle in Jim Kemmy's speeches. In fact, there's no waffle in his speeches at all. They're very interesting. They're very much to the point. So I really commend this publication. It is really fantastic to have a collection of Jim's writing in one place. I'm sure Derek and Dominic would confirm that there's probably another volume. There's lots and lots and lots of material that could be published in the future. But this is a really fantastic start, and it is really great to have Jim's writings and speeches and letters and ideas in the one place. Because obviously we find Jim Kemmy in the Old Limerick Journal, we find him in the Limerick Socialist, he's in the Limerick Compendium and Limerick Anthology, but he's quite modest in terms of how much of himself he puts into those publications. Whereas in this we have a really fine collection. When I think about Jim Kemmy's contribution, then to conclude, he contributed hugely across all those things I mentioned. He contributed hugely to not only political and cultural life in Limerick, but also just how we think about the world. And in many respects, the kinds of campaigns that Jim Kemmy was involved in the 1970s and 1980s. When we think now about the availability of divorce or contraception or abortion or whatever, we take these campaigns for granted. Gay rights, we take them for granted, right? Jim was to the forefront in campaigning about these issues when it wasn't, as Miles McGoffin would say, profitable nor popular to be doing these kinds of things. And he suffered a great deal in terms of the reaction of the press and the Catholic hierarchy and so on, and was condemned and so on for campaigning and being a radical. But he had the courage of his convictions to do that. So Jim, I think I would see his life work, and what's most noteworthy about his life work is his capacity to be brave, to go against the grain of traditional orthodoxies, whether these were of a Catholic or nationalist hue, and engage with more critical perspectives on how society was organised and whose interests were being served. Jim's ability to show leadership and create a context in which ideas and alternative points of view are debated and discussed is also of some significance. So we can see what he did. We see his huge contribution in terms of local history writing, in terms of organising people politically and so on. And I think, just to repeat myself, that the hallmark of his work, particularly his local history writing, was its truly democratic nature. Jim's work was always governed by an inclusive approach, which was mindful of the need to include the voices and experiences of the poor, the marginalised and the working class. To speak of Jim Kemmy's legacy in the singular is to do his memory a disservice. As this book really accurately shows, Jim Kemmy's legacy is multifaceted. His lifelong commitment to a just, socialist, humanitarian view of the world is what stands out most of all. Jim Kemmy showed us, as this book demonstrates, that the sky would not fall in if we questioned the old certainties. He demonstrated the need for working class people to have a confidence in standing up for their rights and believing in themselves. So it's Jim's ability, his dedication to bear witness for the common man and woman, for calling out exploitation, and for always imagining and proposing a better world for all through collective action is what continues to strike me most in terms of his contribution. This book encapsulates Jim Kemmy's ideas, his influences, how his ideas changed over time. There's great humour in many of the speeches and so on, so I would commend the book to you. I was thinking about the book launch just as I finished, and I was thinking, Jim Kemmy would be the last person who would want a mawkish account of his life or to be sentimentalised. I think Jim Kemmy would want, in 2023, for all of us, Dominic mentioned younger people, but for all of us to double down in terms of having a more critical perspective on society. 26 years after Jim's untimely passing, the world, as we know, has become an even more individualised place. There are increasing inequalities based on class, gender and ethnicity. We can see, issues in Gaza in terms of genocide and so on. And I know if Jim Kemmy were here, he will be speaking out firmly against it. And I think this book really demonstrates that. So Dominic and Derek, congratulations for putting this fine book together. I really do commend it to all of you, and I do hope it gets a very wide readership so people continue to engage with the good work and ideas of our good friend, comrade and colleague Jim Kemmy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Owen Devereux. And now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Jan O'Sullivan, a colleague and friend of Jim Kemmy.
Thanks, Tom, and I just want to, first of all, just congratulate Dominic and Derek and Limerick Writers Centre for producing this book, and Owen, as usual, for just a fantastic, broad speech about Jim Kemmy. And, last year we commemorated Jim's 25th anniversary. And earlier this year again, Owen spoke at Culture Night about Jim's contribution to the arts. And for those of us who knew him very well, and Margaret here sitting beside me probably knew him better than practically anybody, I suppose we saw him close up, and it's just wonderful to see the breadth now of what his life was about. And I think this book really brings it home. And it also shows that really all of the different things that Jim was involved in, whether it was the local history, his interest in the bands, his interest in music, his politics, his brave campaigning on a variety of issues, it was all of a piece in a lot of ways. It was what he was. He was somebody whose work was about improving the lives of ordinary people, but also giving them their voice, as Owen has just said. Now, Dominic asked me to read a piece from so I'm not going to make a speech, he asked me to read something out of the book. And when Owen was speaking, he talked about the bravery, which everyone knows about voting against the budget with the tax on children's shoes. So I thought that I would read from Jim's maiden speech in the Dáil in June 1981, when they were voting on the election of Taoiseach. and Gareth Fitzgerald was being proposed as Taoiseach, and it was a minority Fine Gael Labour government at the time, and was really just able to exist because of the support of a small number of independents, including Jim. Jim was an independent at the time. This was before the Democratic Socialist Party was formed. And, I think it was a shock to Gareth Fitzgerald. I think it was probably a shock to a lot of people that he actually voted against that budget. And as Owen has said, it shows the courage of the man, that he actually did this and knew that it would probably bring about the fall of the government. But when I read the maiden speech, and I had forgotten, I'm sure I read it before, but when I read it, it really does explain that it shouldn't have been a shock to anybody that he voted against that budget. Because again, it was true to his character, but it was also true to what he said in his maiden speech. So that's why when Dominic asked me to read, I decided that this is what I wanted to read. I'm not going to read the whole speech, but just a piece out of it. And as I say, when you hear that, you realise that it was absolutely consistent that he voted against the budget, despite the fact that it was going to bring down a government that he was supporting at this particular time. So part of the speech is, I would not expect Deputy Fitzgerald to change the essential nature of the party he leads, but I would expect from him and from the Labour Party in coalition honest and decent government in telling the people where we stand. I'm also concerned with the matter of employment, and any support I may give today will be conditional and qualified and will be above all critical support. My decision is made freely. I am my own man, have always been and will continue to be in this house. I found my foot in some strange doors last week, and my foot will stay inside those doors. If I vote today for a government, I will do so intending to exercise my role as a guarantor of the package put before the people last weekend, and to see that those proposals are carried through. If Deputy Fitzgerald is elected Taoiseach, I will be a frequent visitor to his door, because I intend to use my voice and all the strength I have to ensure that we pull the Irish people into the modern world and tell them the truth about the many questions facing us. I'm concerned also about taxation, and I'm not happy with the package put before us. In due course, I will have something to say on the matter. I expect better relations with Northern Ireland, and I feel that the articles I've mentioned, and that was Articles 2 and 3 of the Constitution, are offensive to certain people in the North. It has been said that the independent members can play the role of kingmakers. I've read a little about history, and sometimes kingmakers do not last as long as kings. I'm very conscious of that, and I do not intend to let this fleeting moment of notoriety go to my head. I intend to use my position, not in any reckless way, but in a serious way to attain some of the objectives towards which we must work. My vote will be based on that decision, and if there is any attempt by Fine Gael or Labour to go back on the agreement they have reached, I will be the first person to pull the rug from under them. I can go back to my hammer and trowel in a few weeks or a few months, as the case may be. I've suffered defeats in the past, so the prospect of defeat and the government falling does not frighten me in the least. I say to Deputy Fitzgerald and Deputy O'Leary that if they have my vote today, it is freely and willingly given, and no price has been paid for it. My hands are totally clean, and no deal has been done or pact reached. That vote is given on condition that they will have a good and decent government who will respect the Irish people as they have not been respected in the past. It's a fantastic speech, and it really does illustrate what Owen said. He didn't waffle, he was straight to the point. And if they had listened to that speech, I think they would have realised that they were making a big mistake in taxing children's shoes at that time. So when I got the opportunity to read a piece, and when Dominic asked me, I said, this is the piece I have to read. And it's great to be here, it's great to have this book, and well done to both of you. And it really does, as I said, pull together a lot of things that we knew about Jim, but we just hadn't seen them together in one book before. So I think in Limerick, we need to continue to commemorate the legacy of Jim Kemmy, because he was a very rare, very principled, very brave person. And looking back now, 26 years later, I think we realise what an enormous contribution he's made. So thanks very much, well done, and again, as usual,
Thank you very much, John O'Sullivan. Now, we're all very aware that Jim was a an incredible, he was in the best sense of the word, he was a street fighter, politically speaking. And but he also kept a watching brief on art, on the arts and on culture. And he contributed to everything. He wrote to everybody, and wrote about everything. And I'll take a little piece from the Limerick Observer, where he gives a plug to Kieran O'Driscoll's excellent poetry workshop, and includes a poem by a late friend of mine, Marion Kelly. Subsequently she became Marion Healy, which was actually, she reverted back to her original name, but that's neither here nor there. And I quote from Jim: "I was pleased to learn that Limerick Poetry Workshop is launching issue number 1 of the Limerick Poetry Broadsheet on Friday 27th of May at 8 p.m. at Limerick City Art Gallery. This publication follows last year's excellent anthology of poems by members of the workshop, entitled Nervous Squares, Easy Circles. The editor is workshop organiser Kieran O'Driscoll. And recently Kieran O'Driscoll was kind enough to let me have a copy of a poem by a member of the Limerick Poetry Workshop. Marion Kelly's work, Ballad of the Deserted Wife, is a biting commentary on our society's attitude to deserted wives, and indeed to men and women caught in the terrible moment of the breakdown of their marriages. Ballad of the Deserted Wife. Each night she sits there all alone. Please ring, she begs the silent phone. It's hard to fill this empty space. A single woman has no place in this our land of harmony, when 68% agree the married cannot be set free. Despite the pain of those who wait, staring at a cheerless grate, for those who are left with no goodbye, best be content with just a sigh, and know that your reward is night in paradise, where its book proclaim the meek will meet with just acclaim. Meanwhile be grateful for the grace that helps you in adversity's face. Stay faithful to your marriage vows, and as for those who live with rows, why, we all know that kids prefer a battered mother who'll defer to blows to pride and mind and body, rather than live in a society where each could go his separate way. So all of you who've blown your chance, your times is past for song and dance. For priest and people have decreed, you'll stifle your unseemly greed. Failed marriages you may resent, but with one partner be content, even in abstention. And if you feel that you're not free, accept the pity and agree." That was Marion Kelly. God bless her. Now, every good situation deserves a song, and we conclude with a song from the troupe here by our leader, Mr. Taylor. The song celebrating Jim Kemmy. Thank you.
I must acknowledge that poet John Diddy as well, he gave me the inspiration for this song. It's called Home to Gary Owen. He was home to Gary Owen without the glory. Yeah, he was home to Gary Owen without the glory. It was the 60s come back to the 50s time war. This man of stone forced to walk the sidewalk, plagued by feelings of inadequacy. Returning to a wounded democracy, he was home to Gary Owen without the glory. Yeah, he was home to Gary Owen without the glory. The big in mind, vacant stature, break down the walls that once were secure. Written by socialist notions, set the progress of the city in motion. Then I was home to Gary Owen without the glory. Yes, he's home to Gary Owen without the glory. the poor and voiceless he used his clap, chose the lonely path when there was doubt. This toiling man of the people put his faith in man of the steeple, and now he's home to Gary without the gold. Yes, he's home to Gary without the gold. Now I hear again that gentle voice in the bird box dispensing advice. I followed the spot on the label, thankful for my time at his table, and now he's home to Gary in all his glory. Yes, he's home to Gary in all his glory. Yes, he's home to Gary in all his glory. Now he's home.
This is a song, the ballad of Pierce Riley by James Joyce, who was very much influenced by the Greeks, like the Ulysses and the Odyssey, and Aristophanes. And you know, Aristophanes was a satirical writer, and one of his poems was about Dionysus going to hell to interview Aeschylus and Euripides, who had died, because he believed that the role of the poet was to give society a reflection of itself. The reason why Athens was destroyed in the Peloponnesian Wars because the poets had died, and there was no one giving to society a real reflection of what life was all about. And I think we could apply that to society today. We don't know what is being presented. So anyway, having said that, I happened to be an actor at one stage for about 2 weeks. I was a frog in one of Aristophanes' plays, and James Joyce got the ballad of Pierce Riley from the time of this. So my role was to say, we are the musical frogs, we live in the marshes and bogs, sweetest are hymns we sing as we swim, and on festival days we sing to the praise of the genial gods who don't take a dog at the multitudes thrown to the sound of our song, break echo, whack, whack, whack. So now, this is a Greek tune. I got a tune I got from the parties in Dublin. They were travellers, and then short, and then a tune by Theodorakis Greek, and then the ballad of Pierce Riley. A D minor. How he fell in a roll and a rumble, curled up like Lord Oliver, crawling like a hood of the magazine wall, home Parmesan. He was the father of all things for to bother us. Slow coaches on the mat with contraceptives for the populace. Mares milk for the 6, 7 rice Sundays a week over there. Love and religious reform. So hideous and fun. We had chops, chairs, chewing gum, chicken pox and china chambers for the celebrate sons of Scandinavia, and we laid them down in Oxford's town along the different gates at Deaf and Dundee, and all there remains. He was one time our king of the castle, now he's kicked about like a rotten old parcel, and Big Green Street to be sent the order of his worship to the penal jail him and joy, to the jail him and joy, jail him with joy. Otherwise, you couldn't he manage it, I'll go obey me fine dirty man darling, like the bunker bull of the Cassidys. All his butter is in his arms, his butter is in his arms. How sweet bad luck to the waves washed up in our Ireland, the hoop of the Harfell Vikings and Gaul's cursed day, that happened on the base of the black and tan man of war, black and tan man of war, in the harbour bar. Now all the king's memories, horses couldn't resurrect his corpses, and there was no true spell in comic or hell, able to raise the dead king.
The last word definitely hasn't been spoken about or written about the great Jim Kemmy, but the last word here today is, I hope, from Mike Kemmy, who might read something or say something. Mike Kemmy.
Thanks everyone for coming along. Fantastic piece of work by Dominic and Derek. I was going through it over the last couple of weeks, and you know, there's some fabulous articles, letters, interviews. I don't know how you picked them out, Dom, because
the David Bowie method, threw everything up in the air. I
wouldn't recommend that.
When we were at the 25th anniversary celebration there in September last year, we were in UL for the talk on Jim's archive, and as the archivist said at the time, like, Jim kept everything and wrote on everything and wrote in the back of things and the front of things. So how you managed to get these pieces into one book must have been a tough enough task. So congratulations, a great job. I'm just going to read one small piece that stuck in my mind as I was looking through the book, because again on that weekend, on the Sunday just around the corner here, we had a walk with Mike Finn, led by Mike Finn, and I was kind of tagging along, and we had a great group of people who came along, and we stopped at a lot of the places in Limerick that were kind of synonymous with Jim, but there was a lovely touch before we started the walk. I had mentioned to the Boer Boy band that we were doing the event, and they said they'd love to get involved, so they played a few lovely pieces before we took off on the walk, and as we started they played us off, and it was a lovely touch. And I know Jim was very fond of the Boer Boy band, and my dad will confirm he was involved in building the Boer Boy clubhouse. So this is an interview that Jim did with RTE's Country Brass Limerick in 1978. A very short piece. I picked one of the shorter pieces down from the book, but anyway, I'd like to read it because I think it all ties in very nicely with the launch of the book, with the fact that last year was Jim's 25th anniversary, and of course the connection with the Boer Boy band, which is very close to this area as well. So anyway, the people that played with the Boer Boy band of the time, 1850s, 1860s and 1870s, were mainly tradesmen. You would find a lot of stone cutters, carpenters, fitters, street sweepers and general labourers. They were mainly working class people, and they came from the streets of Limerick that would be described as the side streets, the lanes and the slums of the city. But whatever about these conditions, they went on to produce marvellous music. They came from an area of Limerick called the Yellow Road, hence the name Boher Boy Band. That was the origin of the Boher Boy Band in Limerick. There is great interest in the Boher Boy Band lately because shortly after the band was founded in 1850, you had the development in Ireland of the Fenian movement. And many members of the band were Fenian supporters and sympathisers, and indeed marched with the Fenians and suffered for their allegiance there. Another influence there, which is very strong in the Boher Boy Band and is typical of many Irish bands insofar as many of its members were originally servicemen and learnt their music from regimental bands in Britain and came home when they were demobbed to Limerick to play with the Boher Boy Band. They were nearly all members of the Munster Fusiliers. They had a first-class drum corps, they had a bugle corps also. They made a record about 60 years ago, which some people have yet to hear. Time passes on. Thanks very much.
He was home to Gary without the glory. Yeah, he was home to Gary without the glory. It was the 60s come back to a 50s time war. This man of stone forced to walk the sidewalk, plagued by feelings of inadequacy, returning to a wounded democracy. He was home to Gary without the glory. Yeah, he was home to Gary without the glory. Big in mind, big in stature, bring down the walls that once were secure, driven by socialist notions, set the progress of the city in motion. Yeah, now he's home to Gary without the glory. Yes, he's home to Gary without the glory.